6 months ago, a lone voice in Kenya warned of a storm that few believed would ever arrive. Political analyst Andura Aringi said it plainly. The first casualties will be Wetangula and Cheruiyot. Raila will not lick his wounds quietly. Many dismissed it as just another prophecy in Africa's crowded theater of politics. But today, as the halls of Kenya's parliament echo with threats, accusations, and even talk of impeachment, Aringi's chilling words are playing out in real time. The story begins with Raila Odinga's failed bid for the African Union chairmanship. Backed openly by President William Ruto, his defeat wasn't just personal, it was historic. And according to Aringi, it set in motion a chain of retaliation. Raila, he predicted, would turn inward, destabilizing the very government that once supported him. Now the cracks are visible for all to see. Speaker Moses Wetangula is under siege. Majority Leader Erosion Cheruiyot faces the heat, and Parliament itself has become the battleground. Picture it, a sitting president branding his own parliament as hopelessly corrupt, threatening arrests, while lawmakers, red-faced with fury, fire back with threats to remove their own leaders. It is not politics as usual. It is a family divorce, messy and destructive, the kind where both sides promise to burn down the house before walking away. And this raises the haunting question, is Kenya watching the slow collapse of its own government from within? Will Raila Odinga's revenge strategy truly succeed in dismantling Ruto's fragile coalition? Or will the president find a way to restore order before the storm tears the country apart? Stay with us until the end of this video, because what is unfolding in Nairobi's parliament today will not remain in Kenya tomorrow. It may very well shape the balance of power across Africa. Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness Kenya's hidden storm, and subscribe if you believe that the truth matters more than the headlines. 6 months ago, when Andura Aringi warned that Raila Odinga would retaliate after losing the African Union chairmanship, many dismissed it as an exaggeration. Yet here we are watching his words unfold almost line by line. The first names he mentioned, Speaker Moses Wetangula, Majority Leader Erosion Cheruiyot, and Kimani Ichung'wah, are no longer just political figures in the background. They are at the very center of a growing storm. The failed AU bid was more than a political defeat. It was a public humiliation for Raila Odinga, a man who has spent decades positioning himself as Kenya's elder statesman and continental voice. President William Ruto had thrown his weight behind Raila's candidacy, hoping to turn a rival into a continental ally. Instead, the rejection at Addis Ababa left Raila empty-handed and angry. And according to Aringi, this anger was never going to fade quietly. Raila, he said, would not leave the battlefield. He would simply change it. The battlefield is now Kenya's own parliament and senate. Aringi's prophecy outlined a sequence: first, discredit Wetangula, expose weaknesses, and lay the groundwork for removal. Then turn to Cheruiyot and Ichung'wah, majority leaders in both houses, and push one of them out to make way for an ODM loyalist. It would be framed as building a broad-based government, but the underlying aim was revenge, destabilize the UDA coalition, and weaken Ruto's inner circle. And that groundwork has already been laid. Court rulings now question Wetangula's credibility, citing lies under oath. Each judgment becomes a stone added to the foundation of a removal campaign. Aringi had warned, they will say this man is not fit for office. And indeed, those whispers are now growing louder in Nairobi's corridors of power. At the same time, the machinery of government appointments is shifting. Cabinet secretaries, principal secretaries, even ambassadors, Aringi predicted many would be replaced as part of the restructuring. Each move designed not only to punish Ruto's loyalists, but to insert Raila's allies where they can shape policy budgets and contracts. It is politics as warfare waged not with bullets, but with committee votes, judicial rulings, and strategic appointments. For ordinary Kenyans, these changes may appear abstract, but the stakes are real. The men being targeted are not just names in the headlines. They are the gatekeepers of legislation, the voices that decide what bills are debated, what budgets are passed, and whose interests are protected. When those voices are silenced or replaced, it is the citizens who feel the consequences, from food prices to healthcare funding. Raila's strategy, as described by Aringi, is nothing short of a political divorce. And like many divorces, it is messy, emotional, and destructive. He would not simply walk away from Ruto's government. He would ensure it collapses under the weight of betrayal and infighting, just as he once did during the Moi era. The script is not subtle, it is deliberate, calculated, and painfully effective. This is the reality of Kenya in early 2025. A government that once projected strength and unity now appears fragile, vulnerable to both external pressure and internal sabotage. And as Aringi's words echo, the first casualties will be Wetangula and Cheruiyot, the sense grows that we are not witnessing isolated events, but the opening act of a much larger unraveling. The storm that Andura Aringi predicted did not remain hidden for long. It erupted in full view of the nation when President William Ruto broke with tradition and launched a direct attack on Kenya's parliament and Senate. His words cut deep. He branded the institutions hopelessly corrupt, accusing lawmakers of pocketing money meant for national development. And in a move that stunned both allies and critics, he threatened arrests. For a sitting president to threaten his own legislature is not politics as usual. It is an open declaration of war. In Nairobi's chambers, the air grew heavy with disbelief. Members of parliament who had once cheered Ruto's rise felt cornered, humiliated in front of the nation. This was not just about corruption, it was about survival dignity and the balance of power between branches of government. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Legislators, their pride wounded, turned their fury on the very men tasked with protecting them, Speaker Moses Wetangula in the National Assembly and Amazon Kingi in the Senate. Honorable Speaker, one lawmaker thundered, "If you do not defend this House, we will remove you." Others accused their majority leaders of cowardice, demanding they speak up against Ruto's attacks. The chamber, once filled with routine debates, now echoed with shouts of betrayal and defiance. This was the high point of the drama, the guardians of Kenya's constitution threatening impeachment not against the president, but against their own leadership. In their eyes, Wetangula and Kingi had failed to shield them from Ruto's offensive. If the speaker could not stand as the first line of defense, then he would be the first casualty. The prophecy was unfolding in real time. Raila Odinga, for his part, seized the moment. Though he had lost the AU chairmanship, here was his chance to turn the defeat into leverage. He joined the chorus of criticism, amplifying the anger inside Parliament. Raila did not need to raise his voice. The lawmakers themselves carried the tune. Every accusation they hurled at Ruto, every motion they filed against their leaders, echoed the strategy Aringi had described months earlier. The symbolism was striking. On one side stood the president commanding the executive warning of jail cells for corrupt legislators. On the other side, Parliament and Senate institutions bruised and defensive, threatening to bite back by devouring their own leadership. It was a family feud that had spilled into the public square, exposing Kenya's political system as fractured and unstable. Ordinary citizens watching from a distance could only shake their heads. For years, they had complained about corruption and impunity. Now, even the president himself was admitting that the rot had reached the heart of Parliament. But instead of reforms, the nation was treated to a political brawl, shouting matches, threats and counter-threats, while the economy staggered and public trust eroded further. The climax came with the tabling of a motion, lawmakers openly prepared to remove their speaker. This was not a whisper behind closed doors. It was a declaration on the floor, complete with applause, boos, and finger-pointing. What began as a prediction had now become a spectacle, a constitutional crisis unfolding in real time. And yet beneath the noise, one truth lingered: this was not spontaneous. It was orchestrated. Raila Odinga's shadow loomed over every speech, every threat, every plan to replace leadership with ODM loyalists. He had lost the AU, but he had found a battlefield closer to home, and he was winning without even holding office. This was Kenya at its breaking point, a president standing against his own parliament, a legislature ready to devour its leaders, and a veteran opposition figure smiling quietly as the pieces fell exactly where he had always wanted them. When parliament becomes a battlefield and the president turns his anger against the very institutions meant to check his power, the first casualty is not a politician, it is public trust. For ordinary Kenyans already burdened by rising food prices, unemployment, and insecurity, the spectacle unfolding in Nairobi feels like betrayal. The leaders sworn to serve them are too busy fighting each other to govern. In villages and towns, the headlines are met with weary sighs. Citizens wonder aloud if the president calls Parliament corrupt, and Parliament calls the president a hypocrite who is left to believe this erosion of confidence is dangerous. A democracy may withstand disagreements, but it cannot survive without trust in its institutions. And in Kenya, that trust is collapsing. The political consequences are just as severe. Ruto's United Democratic Alliance, once the dominant force, is now showing visible cracks. Raila Odinga's strategy, what analysts call a messy divorce, is working. By pushing loyalists like Wetangula and Cheruiyot and Ichung'wah toward the exit, he is not only weakening Ruto's control over parliament, but also planting seeds of division within the ruling party. When a coalition begins to doubt its own leaders, collapse often follows. Court rulings questioning Wetangula's honesty, impeachment motions whispered in committee rooms, and threats shouted on the floor of parliament, each act chips away at the fragile balance holding the government together. What emerges is not reform, but paralysis. Laws stall, budgets freeze, and every decision becomes hostage to factional warfare. The civil sphere too feels the tremors. Activists and journalists seize upon the president's own words about corruption, demanding proof and accountability. Opposition rallies fueled by Raila's subtle encouragement frame the conflict as evidence that Kenya's democracy is rotting from the inside. Social media explodes with anger memes, mocking both the president and lawmakers, and questions about whether the entire political class deserves to be swept aside. For many Kenyans, this is not just politics, it is survival. A paralyzed government means delayed salaries for civil servants, stalled infrastructure projects, and uncertainty in international aid negotiations. Farmers wait for subsidies that never arrive. Hospitals lack supplies. Schools go underfunded. In such an environment, cynicism grows, and with it, the risk of unrest. And beyond the civil and economic costs lies a deeper political danger precedent. If Parliament can threaten to remove its speaker simply for failing to defend its pride, and if the president can threaten to arrest legislators without due process, then the line between rule of law and raw power begins to blur. Kenya, long hailed as a model of East African democracy, risks becoming another cautionary tale of institutions hollowed out by ego and vengeance. This is the true cost of the battle between Ruto and Raila. It is not only about who controls the seats of parliament or who dictates the national agenda. It is about whether ordinary citizens can still believe in the idea of Kenya as a functioning democracy. If that belief crumbles, the nation may endure not just political instability, but a profound crisis of identity. From Washington to Brussels, the political storm in Nairobi is not being watched with indifference. Kenya is not just another African country, it is a strategic anchor for the West in East Africa. The United States has long relied on Nairobi as a hub for counter-terrorism operations against al-Shabaab in Somalia, a base for diplomatic outreach, and a trusted partner in regional stability. When cracks appear in Kenya's government, policymakers in Washington grow uneasy. For the Biden administration, the images of a president publicly threatening his parliament while lawmakers plot to impeach their own leaders raise uncomfortable questions. Can Kenya still be trusted as a reliable ally in the fight against terrorism? Will a fractured government honor its commitments to IMF reforms and U.S.-backed development programs? These doubts ripple through the corridors of power in Washington, where stability is often valued more than democratic drama. Europe, too, is concerned. Brussels counts on Kenya as a trade partner and a gateway to the East African market. Political instability threatens to disrupt not just governance, but also the flow of goods, investment, and diplomatic cooperation. In a region where Ethiopia is struggling with internal wars and Sudan remains in chaos, the European Union fears that Kenya might be the next domino to fall. But while the West frets about governance and reliability, other powers see opportunity. China, already deeply invested in Kenya through infrastructure loans and Belt and Road projects, may view the turmoil as leverage. A weakened Ruto could be more open to Beijing's terms. Russia, expanding its footprint in Africa through military cooperation, might also use this moment to present itself as an alternative partner. And then there is Africa itself. Across the continent, Kenya's crisis is compared with a very different story unfolding in the Sahel. While Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré consolidates sovereignty, reclaims resources and projects strength, Kenya appears trapped in internal quarrels and elite rivalries. For Pan-African thinkers, the contrast is striking. Two Africas, two paths, one toward independence and unity, the other toward paralysis and division. For the American audience, the lesson is sobering. Kenya has long been seen as the safe bet in a troubled region. But as the prophecy of Andura Aringi plays out and Raila Odinga's revenge strategy weakens Ruto's coalition, even this safe bet looks increasingly fragile. The question for Washington is not just how to respond, but whether the U.S. has underestimated the resilience of African politics to bend in directions they cannot control. In the end, what happens in Nairobi will not stay in Nairobi. It will affect U.S. strategy, European trade, Chinese investment, and African unity. The world is watching and waiting to see whether Kenya can weather the storm or collapse under the weight of its own divisions. The prophecy of Andura Aringi was never about one man losing a chair at the African Union. It was about what happens when ambition collides with power and when old wounds refuse to heal. 6 months later, Kenya finds itself exactly where he said it would, in the middle of a messy, painful political divorce. The signs are undeniable. A president accusing his own lawmakers of corruption. A parliament threatening to impeach its own speaker. An opposition leader defeated abroad, quietly reshaping the battlefield at home. And through it all, ordinary Kenyans are left to wonder whether their leaders are building a future or simply tearing down the last remains of trust. This is not just Kenya's crisis. History reminds us that when a key nation falters, the tremors reach far beyond its borders. Washington feels it in security briefings about Somalia. Brussels feels it in the uncertainty of trade routes through Mombasa. Beijing calculates how much more influence it can gain, and in Africa's own capitals, the contrast is sharp. While Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso speaks of sovereignty and rebuilding, Kenya risks being consumed by infighting. Two different Africas, two different futures. The warning is clear: if Kenya cannot resolve its divisions, the cost will not be measured only in lost votes or leadership changes. It will be measured in jobs lost, families, struggling youth disillusioned, and a nation's credibility broken on the world stage. And once lost credibility is not easily regained. So I ask you, do you believe Raila Odinga's strategy will succeed in dismantling William Ruto's fragile government? Or will Kenya find a way to hold itself together before the cracks become irreversible? And what lesson should the rest of Africa draw from this struggle? That politics is forever a cycle of betrayal, or that a different path like the one pursued in Burkina Faso is possible? Please share this video if you feel that you are among the first to recognize the scale of Kenya's hidden storm. Subscribe if you believe Africa deserves leaders who serve their people, not their egos. Because at the end of the day, this story is not just about politics in Nairobi. It is about whether Africa will choose division or unity, corruption or dignity, collapse or sovereignty. The decision may begin in Kenya, but its consequences will echo across the continent.